Welcome to More Than a Therapy Couch, the podcast where we go beyond the walls of traditional therapy sessions. I'm your host, Tiana. In a world that's constantly changing, so are the ways we navigate our mental and emotional health. We're here to embrace the notion that healing and growth extend far beyond the walls of a therapy room. Throughout this podcast, we'll be joined by a diverse array of experts and everyday individuals with compelling stories to help bring awareness to whatever you may be facing. We'll unpack the complexities of the human experience, tackle taboo topics, and challenge the stigmas surrounding mental health. So grab your emotional support water bottle, find a comfy spot, and join us as we embark on a journey that goes more than a therapy couch. Let the session begin. As a reminder, the topics discussed are for educational purposes only and are not meant to be taken as clinical advice. If you are concerned about you or a loved one's mental health, consult a mental health professional or call SAMHSA's 24-hour hotline at 1-800-662-HELP. Welcome back to More Than a Therapy Couch. I'm your host, Tiana, and we're here with a licensed, experienced therapist from Tree of Life, Jimmy. Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. For the viewers who are watching, do you think you could just tell them a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am a therapist. I'm a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey. I have a certification to also supervise substance abuse counselors, trying to get licensed or certified, and I'm also a nationally certified counselor too. Huh? So many credentials.
Yeah, a lot of credentials, but I'm sure they're definitely very useful in your sessions.
Absolutely.
And was there anything particular that kind of led you to becoming a therapist?
So I always had a knack to just want to help. So like if either my brother or my mom say they had like a cut or something, I would just run and get like a Band-Aid or something like that. And it felt good because I would just like always do it. But then further down the road, which was very interesting, Dad actually he used to work at Newark Airport. And he would usually come across someone that was homeless. Mm-hmm. So we lived in a 2-family house in Maplewood, New Jersey at the time. And he actually let that person stay there rent-free.
Wow.
So that's
yeah, I actually got goosebumps. That's wow. And how was that like?
It was very interesting. There's actually a sad ending to it. I actually put this on my college application essay, but the guy stayed there, and I think I was like maybe 13, and my brother was there too. He's like 14. Parents would go to work. That guy would come. He would offer us like candy or snacks that he got from the store, and then things were fine. It was a little weird and awkward, but things were fine. So flash forward, there was this incident that occurred where my dad went upstairs to check on the guy. And then he kind of like started yelling. He called me upstairs and I was like running up there. It's like a sense of urgency. And the guy was standing like 10 feet from him. They were in the kitchen upstairs. And my dad like said that, this guy threatened to like harm me with a knife. Mm-hmm. But as I was like looking, I noticed that there was like this can of perishable food that the guy looked like he was trying to open. And that's what he said. But my knee-jerk reaction kind of kicked in. And, my dad told me to call the police. So I went downstairs. I called the police. I was completely frantic. He was like, "Did they come yet?" And I was like, "No, they didn't come." So ultimately, I went out to check, and the police was actually out there. Mm-hmm. So I would zip back in, and then I went back out just to be sure that they were there.
I think I saw them. I'm pretty sure that they're there.
yeah, just a little bit. And when I popped back out again, they told me to freeze. Because they assumed that I was the guy.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, the message that I sent to them, 14-year-old, frantic, guy with a knife.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, you were the person that called.
Yeah.
You were the person that called, and you were also calling because your dad asked for that help. So before that, the fact that they didn't even like fully assess the situation, I think there's different ways to go about it. But anywho, continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So like when I popped out there the second time, they told me to freeze. They had the light, so I couldn't really see anybody. Mm-hmm. So I had these lights on me, and they told me to get down. I was like very quiet, very stunned. I didn't want to like move or say anything. So I kneeled down. They were going to like handcuff me and everything. And then my dad, his head popped out of the window. I was like, no, that's not him. That's my son.
You got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was like, wow. So they go upstairs. They grab the guy. They take him all the way downstairs. They let me go, obviously. And I see the guy carried away. And I was like, wow, that's sad.
Well, definitely the fact that let's backtrack. It all started with how your dad was like, listen, I want to help this person. We're gonna do this because you guys are just, from what it seems like your parents did very well. You're a very great guy. And hearing that your dad did that, I feel like shows a lot of character of your parents and how you and your brother, I'm sure, were raised. But then not only that, to then you're still a kid. So for you, processing, having, the stranger come and now, essentially living with you to now experiencing that, what was that like for you? As a kid, I'm sure it was hard to kind of understand.
Yeah, it was very confusing because I couldn't make heads or tails of exactly what was going on. And I just kind of responded in the sense, hey, my dad's in danger, so I got to do something. But I was kind of conflicted at the same time. And there's a part of me that knew that there was something off about the whole situation. So they kind of took him out, and I guess, it felt a bit dramatic to see that, kind of knowing that he was helpless, and now not only being homeless, now you have this charge. So we just kind of effectively made his life worse.
Well, I don't think that. I think that was his decision on what he did. I think that sometimes they don't want help. And the fact that you guys were willing to give that help, the world needs more kindness. And the fact that you just were so kind to a stranger and he decided to do what he did, you guys didn't have to do that. His life could have been worse, without you guys even doing that. So I think that's something to kind of, think about, because I think you gave him an opportunity where his life could be better, where he could have went in a different direction, and he chose to take that path. He didn't need to.
Well, sure. I think that's definitely a major takeaway, and he's got everywhere else to go. So there's definitely a lot to it. But it's something that definitely gave me something to put in my essay. So when I was getting to college and needed something to write about. It really brought me back.
Yeah, and that definitely. So was there anything particularly in that moment that made you think oh, I'm going to be a therapist rather than, a nurse or a PA in that aspect? Because that aspect, you also are helping people. Do you like the aspect more where you get to talk to the people, get to learn how their mind works, get to, learn certain things like that? What particular part of it do you like?
Well, interesting you asked that. So, originally I was kind of thinking, wow, I could be a doctor or a PA or something like that. And then I discovered in high school and then eventually in college, I'm not really good at math or science.
I hated anatomy. I suck at spelling, and I was so worried about spelling the certain words correctly than where they were, what part was next to what. I did not do good with anatomy, and I'm the same way. I love to help people, but I think there's different ways of helping people, which is, it's good to know, because I feel especially growing up, everyone's kind of well, if you want to help people, be a doctor, be a nurse, be a fireman. There's other jobs that you can have where you are working one-on-one and you actually see that. I feel that's too, if let's say you're a firefighter, for example, and you help someone come out of a fire, it's a lot different than actually being able to see the growth from the beginning to the end of, that person's journey.
Yeah, exactly. With a firefighter or a police officer, once you've helped the person, their journey continues, and that's where you guys part ways. But working as a therapist, you can kind of again be along for the ride as far as the journey is concerned.
Yeah, it's definitely very nice. I think it. I love therapy. I hope my therapist thinks that. I've grown. But on that note, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll be right back after our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Tree of Life Counseling Center, where people come to heal, deal, and learn to thrive. They currently have immediate availability for talk therapy and medication management with a team of over 50 licensed clinicians. Are you feeling alone? We all can use someone to talk to. Call 732-393-8391 or visit us at www.treeoflifecc.org to start your journey of self-discovery and healing today. And we're back. So, Jimmy, would you be able to let the viewers know what is addiction and how do you approach your clients who come to counseling for addiction?
That's a very good question. So when we think about addiction, it's typically defined as a compulsion to engage in a certain behavior. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times there's a bit of confusion about like how to conceptualize addiction. So an individual who says that, oh, I only drink on weekends, or, I drink every day. And then, they're like, well, that's not an addiction because, I'm not on the street. I'm not constantly pursuing it. Whereas like one thing that people may typically forget or maybe not consider is that if they are not able to access that behavior, whether it be drinking, whether it be gambling, and they experience a sense of discomfort, almost feeling out of place, mm-hmm. not really feeling at ease, then that's an indication that there's an addiction there. Mm-hmm. There's a strong connection with that behavior, and we start to be aware of it when we do not have access to it.
Absolutely. I feel like there's with certain things I have a few people in my life that do struggle from addiction. And one thing that I've noticed is if they haven't had whatever it is, they're like, well, when am I going to have that again? Or when are we going to do that again? Or this or that. And it's always that like constant thing on your mind. So when a client like comes to sessions and they have that like reoccurring thought where it is on their mind, how do you kind of approach that?
Well, part of it is just having a conversation about what they want. Mm-hmm. What brought them to therapy, what brought them to treatment, what are they looking for? So in that kind of like space, I also try to get an understanding in terms of like, well, what is their insight into addiction? Like, what do they know about it? Have they already used like resources already? And then we go into more so about the thought process around it. Mm-hmm. So considering like urges and, a desire to kind of like use whatever it might be. They may have cravings, just like we may have cravings for a burger, mm-hmm. or something that feels good but may not be healthy. It's kind of getting their idea about what that internal experience is like. And then when we go into thoughts, usually there are certain thoughts like, I can't handle this without it, mm-hmm. or, I need to go and get it, whatever it might be. And those thoughts could be very like pervasive.
Mm-hmm. And how does someone recognize that they're suffering from an addiction? Or is that something that they may not be able to recognize if they're actively using?
Well, a lot of people may not essentially have like insight mm-hmm. into addiction and whether or not it's become a problem in their life from internal. Mm-hmm. So usually the problems that they notice are external. If their relationships are strained, if they've lost their job. So just like a lot of like psychosocial issues, a lot of people, whether it's gambling addiction or substance use, they also don't really have much money. So mm-hmm. that's like a huge like sign, but typically it's with how it impacts relationships. Mm-hmm. So a person who continues to use substances and develops an addiction or, a substance use disorder, they may also find that they neglect mm-hmm. all other things, all other areas of their life other than the use. So mm-hmm. that becomes like the object of their addiction.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that people who are coming, for counseling for specifically addiction, it more so comes from because people outside of their lives have kind of said, hey, this is kind of an issue. And maybe they haven't blatantly flat out said, hey, this is an issue, but like you mentioned, you lost your job and it's starting to affect your outside life. Is there ever a time where someone's able to like actively kind of recognize that, where they're actively using, or do you think that it more so comes from the people that are around them?
It could come from like a combination of both. Mm-hmm. Like if someone starts to like notice like early warning signs, and let's say like they were experimenting and they start to experience like some of the adverse side effects. Like if someone's like using opiates, for instance, and they want to test it out, they may throw up. They may have like a really huge adverse side effect to it. Someone who's, let's say, experimenting with marijuana, even though it's legal, it's something that, you know, they may also experience some of the adverse side effects like anxiety or paranoia, and in some cases like psychosis. But that's usually like with prolonged use. But ultimately, it's like a very negative consequence that just makes this strong negative association with this thing that they originally assumed would be a good experience or feeling.
And when the clients are coming to these sessions, specifically when someone else in their life has kind of made that recommendation, from what you've seen in your sessions, does the client see success if they're not willing to put in the work, number one, or if they think, well, I don't have an addiction, I don't have a problem, it's just something occasion, I just do it on the weekend?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So someone who is referred, whether it's part of like the criminal justice system, let's say they're on probation or on drug court, and they're like mandated to go, or their family kind of gave them an ultimatum or encouraged them to go. Usually it's really hard for them to see success because, you know, they may be in denial. They may think that they do not have a problem with addiction or a substance abuse problem, but they don't want their family member to keep talking and encouraging them and telling them that they have to go do it. And they also do not want to face the consequences if they don't. So that's usually why they would come, just to prevent the consequences, but also to prevent their partner from being upset with them.
Absolutely. And then it sometimes gets to the point where I'm sure in sessions, like, okay, you know, we're working on this. Are you, you know, still doing these things? Now, I think it's very important that I think a lot of people are maybe not aware of are with our level of care. So we're outpatient level. Clients see you once a week for 1 hour, maybe every other week. And then there's some clients that you may even see monthly. So with all of that, if you're seeing a client once a week for 1 hour and they're actively using, is that 1 hour a week really going to do much, or would they need a different type of approach to help them reach recovery?
In that case, if the person is still actively using, that they might need a higher level of care. And typically in certain settings for outpatients, we may not have any way to monitor like their usage. So they could come in and tell us that they have stopped. They could tell us that they've discontinued or reduced it somehow, but we would have no way of determining that unless we had like, you know, urine test, like screening tools or whatever the case may be, to send it to a lab or to determine like whether or not they're using, or any other kind of like hair follicle test in order to determine that as well. So it's completely an honor system. But if the person is still actively using, then they're also not at baseline, meaning that their normal level of functioning without any sort of like influence. And that's where treatment can really have an impact because they're not really fully present. And like with therapy, the challenging part about it is that you may get in touch with emotions and feelings because we're processing a lot of things. And if you're still actively using, you're not really there.
Absolutely. You don't have that, you know, clear mind where you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to work on things, or this is, you know, the root of the problem, why I even started it. You may not really know if you're still using and you have a cloudy mind. Let's say, for example, someone comes in because their family, you know, recommended them and said that, you know, gave them an ultimatum. This is what you need to do. But they're still actively using, and then they're coming to the sessions and they're not really putting in the work. And it's like, what are we doing? You can't want it for the client. The client has to kind of want it for themselves too.
That's a very good point. It definitely has to come from the desire of the client or the person coming in. And ultimately, you know, if they're with their family and they're actively using and the family obviously wants them to stop, and then they come into treatment where, you know, my intention my goal for them is also to stop, especially if it's doing harm and nothing changes. Let's say they still remain at the same level of care, then I'm basically just replicating what's happening at home, which is not really helping the client.
Absolutely. And when a client, gets to the point or is able to kind of recognize whether it's themselves, whether it's because of outside life changes, hey, maybe I'm in addiction, what are kind of their stages of change from there? Where do they go from there?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So ultimately, like, if the client who's coming in fully denies and doesn't believe that they have a problem, so they would be in pre-contemplation. So they don't really see it at all. And in that kind of space, it's really hard, or it would be detrimental to try to, basically tell them you have a problem. It's almost like telling a kid not to push the red button.
What is the kid going to go do?
Sure. So in the sense of like a client, they may double down. They may just kind of like, also they may just kind of like feel like this is a waste of time. Like, what are you doing here? The next stage after that is contemplation. So basically that means that the individual is ambivalent, or they're on the fence about it. They still like using or some aspect of it, but they also start to notice and be aware of some of the consequences. Like, they could be on the verge of divorce, or maybe they developed some kind of health issue related to their substance use. So then after that, once they've gotten off the fence, so to speak, then they go into preparation. So the preparation stage is that the individual has acknowledged that they have a problem, but now they're more receptive to the idea of getting support. So that could be like, again, coming to a therapist for addiction treatment, and or attending self-help meetings like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and so on and so forth.
Then are there different stages of change that they would kind of go through?
Sure, yeah. So we kind of touched on the first three with pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation. So these stages of change were developed by DiClemente and Prochowski. Those are last names. There's so many last names in terms of like research, but I have good recall for at least those. And ultimately, the next stage after that is action stage. So after preparation, where they receive the help, they know the resources that they have access to, they're starting to work towards, recovery. They've discontinued their use. That's a stage where they're proactive when it comes to addressing the addiction that now they see as a problem. And they're doing things independently on their own to seek help, support, but also to work on themselves, to then get to the stage of maintenance where it's been 6 months to a year, where they've been clean, but they've also kind of taken control, taken a bit of agency over their recovery process. It's my recovery. So they kind of own it in a way.
Okay. So maintenance that you were saying, that's something from my knowledge, it seems like that's when you really have to kind of like hold yourself accountable. You may be around other triggers, but exactly what you're saying, like taking control and kind of owning that, like no one's forcing you to have that drink. No one's forcing you to, take whatever. You have to be the one that's in control and to kind of say no, or this isn't good for me for XYZ, and kind of revisit your reasons to wanting to start this whole process of recovery.
Exactly.
And then is that all of the stages, or are there any other stages that could possibly be part of the change cycle?
Yeah. So after the maintenance stage, there's relapse, which can sound kind of like scary, because sometimes people think about stages as a very linear process. So like once I go through all those stages up into maintenance, it's almost like inevitable I'm going to relapse, where some people can sustain their recovery. Some people may relapse, and essentially with a relapse, it's pretty much like full blown, because like when someone's developing addiction, they develop tolerance, meaning that they may start at a lower level of use, and then it ramps up because their body gets used to that, and they seek higher dosage of whatever it is they're taking in order to achieve a high. So formally, like in the DSM-4, they looked at it as dependence. person is dependent on it. But ultimately, again, like when someone achieves maintenance and they're in recovery, relapse can occur even if someone has been in recovery for like 25 years.
And are there certain things that people, they finished the maintenance stage, now they're if you look on paper and what the cycle is, if that is the next case, during the maintenance stage, are there certain things that people can make sure that they're definitely implementing during the stage to avoid relapse?
Right, yeah. I mean, with the maintenance stage, which could essentially be like a lifelong process because you're basically living life after recovery. Usually all of the resources that you've gathered to get up to that stage of maintenance and the resources, but also the lifestyle changes that you've made, whether you go to meetings, your relationship with your family, with your partner, all these, maybe you're exercising, maybe you're eating healthy, maybe you're changing all these things. And then if you look at like early warning signs for relapse, and let's say you start skipping a bunch of meetings, let's say, you're getting in multiple arguments with your partner or neglecting your kids, or maybe you're just not exercising anymore, taking care of yourself. One person or the other may look at it as like, oh, that's just whatever, but the individual, they're starting to show signs that they're going back. They're sort of like regressing. And then those things that were keeping them healthy, if they're not there anymore, then now it kind of creates this sense like their quality of life is changing. And they're also not doing things for self-care, which can lead to a lot of unpleasant emotions. And then they may start to entertain the idea of using again.
Yeah, and from there, it seems like it can spiral very quickly if they aren't using those resources, because then it kind of goes into, well, I feel guilty about doing this. I don't know if I should, and you're going back and forth, and then you end up doing it, and then you feel guilty, and then maybe you end up using again rather than trying to use those resources or whatever the case may be. So I think if you are in addiction, making sure that you are aware of what stage you are and what part, and checking yourself and being honest, like with certain things, with everything in life, sometimes you need someone to check you. I said to my marketing colleague the other day, I said, hey, I need you to check me with something. I feel like I haven't been doing this enough. Can you make sure that you say like, hey, did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think people get nervous in terms of asking for that because nobody likes to really ask for help. People think, oh, well, I can do it myself. And I feel like you see that common theme of, or I could stop whenever I want.
Yeah. It's something where the addiction basically leads to isolating. Because, some people may, go to a bar, may get a little bit drunk and get out of hand. And then, again, someone may not bat an eye at that and think that, oh, this is just part of American culture. But then that person may start to drink alone, may start to hide it from their loved ones and their family, because there's a part of them that knows that they would frown upon it. But for someone who's in addiction, they may look at it more so as they're going to interfere with my relationship with my drink or my drug. So they do it in isolation, which is basically a sign that it's getting more severe.
Absolutely. And what are some common themes that individuals in recovery explore in session?
Well, one of the main themes that can come up is a lot of shame. So when it comes to doing something, like let's say, for instance, like lying, or not showing up for your family or your kids, that in and of itself can create a sense of guilt. I've done something wrong. And if they haven't really had a handle on the addiction, if they're not getting support or help, then they may keep doing those things and repeat them, thus creating more things that they've done wrong. And ultimately, like with that shame, it's something that more so isn't about the thing that I did. It's more so about who I am. So one thing, and there's a lot of like derogatory like labels that you can put on someone's addiction. Oh, you're a junkie. You're a lowlife, like whatever the case may be. But the person may also like label themselves like, I'm a bad father, bad husband, I'm not a productive member of society. And these labels can carry over. And, again, like they could lead to pervasive thoughts. They can lead the person to, lose confidence in their ability to function in those areas of their lives because they've labeled themselves like a scarlet letter on them. And that's a lot of work that's kind of done, whether it's in individual therapy, group therapy, or in self-help, where, usually when they introduce themselves, they identify as an addict, but they usually also kind of like identify as someone in recovery, which is a more positive spin on that.
Absolutely. And I loved the one part that you said. I think a lot of people don't realize that what you say to yourself, you take in, whether that's good, whether that's bad. Your subconscious is always taking things in. So if you are having those reoccurring thoughts of, I'm not a good father, or I'm this, or, I didn't do this, and feeling that guilt and shame, everyone messes up. Everyone makes a mistake. And if you are struggling through addiction and going into recovery, knowing that like there's nothing wrong with that, but also recognizing, okay, I can't keep doing what I'm doing, and holding yourself accountable. And again, if you can't hold yourself accountable, ask for help. That's why help's out there.
Absolutely. For someone who is in active addiction, they also tend to display like antisocial behavior. And in that, I mean like not really taking into consideration like how my actions affect other people or make them uncomfortable, lying, stealing, like all these things. And when the person finally gets to that place in recovery and it dawns on them what happened, it's almost like waking up from this terrible nightmare that they discover was actually real. And then dealing with not only that immediate moment, but also like possibly like years of almost like not really being in control of yourself, and then doing all these things that you regret, but you also will remember forever.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into my next question. How can addiction affect the rest of the household or your family, especially when trust is broken, when you don't have that trust?
Yes, that's a really great question. So trust is definitely something that is strained and then broken in most families when they have a loved one who is in active addiction or is trying to gain recovery. And since when we think about families, it's systemic. So that individual who's struggling with addiction, they may believe that they're only affecting themselves, that they're the only ones going to jail, or they're the only ones that have to worry if they overdose or whatever. It's something that affects the family. So a lot of family members will bring up that, they don't go to bed until their loved one has come home. They constantly worry. Some family members, may have a codependent relationship. They may enable that person actually help them get drugs, even though that could really compromise them, just for the sake of not seeing their loved one suffering. So ultimately, with the change in the individual, it starts changing the patterns of the relationship, where they can, again, last for years. So then when the person is actually in recovery, it's hard for the family as a system to adapt to this person, even though they're doing the right thing, or, they're in recovery. So that becomes a challenge in and of itself.
With trying to build back that trust and everything, are there situations, I know you mentioned like certain family members, or maybe it's not even a family member, maybe it's a friend, whoever it is that maybe is enabling, your addiction. Does enabling always mean, hey, I'm going to go to the store and go get this for you, or I'm going to go to the block and go meet our guy to go get this for you? Does enabling always look like that, or can enabling also look like other things?
Yeah, definitely. It could take many shapes that are a bit more subtle in nature. So, if you notice like the warning signs of addiction, and then you see your loved one and maybe you don't say anything, or maybe you don't let your friend, your child, your partner, whoever, know that, hey, you're concerned, or you notice something about it. Maybe you decide to, if that friend actually asks for help or maybe wants to hang out, maybe you ignore or screen the call or something. So these are things that could also like just indicate, again, some of the challenges that occur in like relationships when we're looking at active addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely taking a look and, circling back again, but if you are in addiction, making sure that if you are looking for help, making sure that you're looking in the right places. You can definitely go to our website. We have a bunch of links on there where we link, addiction resources and things along that line. I know our front office also has some great connections in terms of, outsourcing for addiction. I think mainly is recognizing you're not alone. And if you do need help, there's nothing wrong with that. And also being able to access that and advocate for yourself, saying like, hey, this is what I need to do. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
There is one last question I do want to ask you before you go. It's a question we ask all of our guests.
Oh, okay.
And if you were stuck on an island and you could bring one book with you, what would you bring and why?
So if I was stuck on an island, I would bring the book called Hatchet, and it's by Gary Paulson. So I read it like when I was a kid, and it's basically about a guy who gets stranded on an island. And it has all this stuff about like survival and how he worked through it. So that would be the book that I would bring.
Sounds like a perfect book if you were stuck on an island.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see you guys next episode.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Bye.